If you had a few extra $1 million laying around, like who doesn't, right? And you were buying a new phone, my question is, would you go Apple or Android?
iPhone 16 Pro Max.
Yeah. I'm not trying to open the can of worms argument of, who's better or not, but it's pretty obvious because it's Apple. But instead, I'm trying to show you how much Apple products have invaded our world in the last few years. Listen to this. AirPods, Apple Pen, iPad, iPhone, iWatch, 2 MacBooks, and an Apple TV is all that I own. Just myself. That's not including any of my children. So I have 8 at my house. But Apple products are everywhere. And most people trace the success of Apple, iPhones, MacBooks, and all things related back to one person. And who is that person?
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs. You are correct. Steve Jobs was one of the original co-founders of Apple. And he was a big part of their early success. However, things weren't always that awesome for very long. In 1985, he was kicked out of the company he started. You see, Jobs was always described as a very driven person. However, the way he responded to his early success made him difficult to work with, and that's putting it politely. He was known for his relentless demands for perfection, and he often pushed his team to the limit and beyond. He was unwilling to compromise, which led to clashes with teammates and employees. His leadership style alienated a lot of his peers, and he was described as temperamental, dismissive of others' ideas, and quick to criticize. In short, he allowed his pride to alienate others to the point that even though he was successful, he was ultimately pushed out of Apple after a power struggle with the CEO. But we all know what happened in 1997, and Apple brings him back, and we know Apple as today. But for the past 2 weeks, we have been talking in a series called All the Feels. And we have been talking about our emotions and how to process and express what we're feeling in a way that honors God and others around us. Tonight, we are going to look at how we respond when we accomplish something positive in our lives. For example, maybe you worked really hard and made the team that you tried out for. Or maybe you have always been good academically, and you've combined that with spending extra time studying to get a grade, or perhaps a class or a scholarship, or to get into a special program. Or perhaps you have a natural music ability, and you gained special recognition for a performance or a piece that you created. But no matter what, it feels good when we accomplish something, does it not? And it makes sense that you should feel a sense of satisfaction when you achieve a goal that you set for yourself. But what do we do, or what can we do, if we want to avoid letting our success lead us to pride, like in Steve Jobs' case? To start, we are going to look at a passage from the book of Romans, which, if you know, is a letter written by the Apostle Paul to Jesus' followers in and around the city of Rome. And as we're going to see, Paul is incredibly direct, which means he doesn't beat around the bush. He doesn't sugarcoat anything. And that's exactly what we have here when he starts talking about the dangers of pride. So, Romans chapter 12, verse 3. It says, because of the privilege and authority God has given me, I give each of you this warning. Don't think you are better than you really are. Be honest in your evaluation of yourselves, measuring yourselves by the faith that God has given us. All right, like I said, Paul isn't messing around here. He gets right to the point. In fact, he is so direct that I can imagine that the people hearing this letter for the first time are pretty offended. He's basically saying, hey, you think you're so great? I'm not saying you're terrible, but you are not as great as you think you are. And if I'm being completely honest, my first reaction to Paul would be something like, wait a minute, who does he think he is? Isn't it arrogant to call someone else out for being arrogant? And yeah, it would be if it wasn't for the few words at the beginning of this passage, right? Let's read this again. Because of the privilege and authority God has given me, I give you this warning. Don't think you are better than you really are. Be honest in your evaluation of yourselves, measuring yourselves by the faith God has given us. So notice here that even though Paul is being direct, he's also actually modeling the same kind of humility that he wants his readers to have. He freely admits that his privilege and authority aren't the result of anything inside of himself. Instead, Paul uses this as an opportunity to point out that he is only able to say what he is saying because of the grace that God has given him. And that's probably a really good thing, because what Paul has to say is not an easy thing for people to hear. Again, Paul says, don't think that you are better than you really are. And he isn't trying to insult anyone. Instead, he's warning his readers and us about how easy it can be to let our pride take over our lives. And Scripture repeatedly warns us about the dangers of pride, and for good reason. Pride shifts our focus inward, centering on ourselves and our abilities. It is incredibly deceptive because it can lead us to believe that we deserve all the credit for all of the good things in our lives. And this thinking can be super destructive to all of our relationships with God and with others. When pride takes hold, we can ultimately start living life as if we are in complete control, when the truth is that we need God and others in our lives way more than we might actually realize. Pride also tends to create a harmful pendulum effect in our lives. Right, on one side, we swing too far, right, by taking all of the credit for the good things we have as if it solely depends on us. And let's be honest, like any of us need any extra weight or pressure every day to carry, right? But that's exactly what self-centered focus does. It adds even more pressure, pushing our expectations to unrealistic levels. Then when something goes wrong or we fail, the pendulum swings in the other direction, and we start spiraling out of control into feelings of worthlessness. And all we want to do is give up, crawl into bed, and eat an endless supply of Nerds gummy clusters. That's the trap of pride. It keeps us overly focused on ourselves. And no matter which way the pendulum swings, it leaves us hurt and depleted. Instead, Paul encourages us to fairly and honestly evaluate ourselves in light of our faith in God. Essentially, Paul is arguing that there is no reason to be filled with pride because everything we have is a gift from God. When we recognize how much God has given us, it's hard to think of ourselves as better than anyone else. By recognizing that all of our gifts and our abilities are the result of God's blessing in our lives, instead of something that we created on our own, it starts to be easier to see that none of us is actually better than anyone else. And when we start to see ourselves and others through this lens, it's much easier to celebrate what God has given us and what he has given others. But what happens when pride does take over? All right, we all know people who are arrogant and prideful. They're not fun to be around. So what do? How do we keep ourselves from letting pride take over? For this, I want to turn to the Old Testament book of Proverbs. All right, the book of Proverbs was written mostly by a man named Solomon, who was considered to be the wisest person who ever lived. All right, here's a rapid-fire list of what he wrote in Proverbs about pride. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 2 says, "Pride leads to disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom." Proverbs 13:10 says, "Pride leads to conflict. Those who take advice are wise." Proverbs 16:18 says, "Pride goes before destruction, and haughtiness or arrogance before a fall." Proverbs 29:23, "Pride ends in humiliation, while humility brings honor." Disgrace, conflict, destruction, humiliation. Those actually sound a lot like what Steve Jobs experienced early on in his career at Apple. And if we allow our pride to take over in our own lives, it's a hard truth that we will most likely all experience too. But am I saying that we can't be excited about what we accomplish or when we do something really well? Or that we can't celebrate when we do something we think we couldn't have done? No, of course not. I'm just saying that when those things happen, we have a choice. That we can choose pride by taking credit for our own abilities and accomplishments, or we can choose humility by recognizing the blessings that we have been given. That they are gifts to us from a God who loves us deeply. So, before we jump into this trap of allowing pride to take over, I just want to make sure that there's nothing else that we miss in the passage that we read earlier. The first thing that I want to call to your attention tonight is this: everything that's good is a gift from God. One of the first things that really jumps out to me in our original passage is that we should each strive to see ourselves as we really are. And that is as people who have been rescued by Jesus, which we did nothing to earn. And the same is true about our gifts and our abilities and our strength. It's all undeserved and unearned. That's why Paul warns us against thinking of ourselves as better than we really are. Because when we start to think that way, we can find ourselves off balance real quickly. We start shining the spotlight on ourselves, which can feel really good, at least for a little while. But over time, we become blind to what's really going on, that everything that we have is a gift from God. James, the youngest brother of Jesus, puts it this way. James chapter 1 and verse 17. "Whatever is good and perfect is a gift coming down to us from God our Father, who created all the lights in the heavens." Again, that doesn't mean that you can't celebrate anything or that you still don't have to work hard. And it doesn't mean that you can't celebrate successes in your life. It just means that when we recognize those good things in our lives, we need to remember and celebrate where they came from. But how do we do that? How do we celebrate without making it about ourselves? That brings us to the next idea from this passage that I want you to know, and that is this: humility leads to joy. I think that the ultimate irony of pride is that it tricks us into thinking that it can lead to joy, but it doesn't. In the beginning, pride makes us feel good about our skills, our determination, our accomplishments, but in the end, it leaves us alone, alienated from others and from God. Humility, on the other hand, allows us to see and even celebrate that our successes come from more than just our own ambition. When we remember that everything we have, including our success comes from God, it gives us the ability to have a deeper satisfaction. Right? You notice humility doesn't lead to happiness. It leads to what? Joy. The result is real, lasting joy instead of a superficial happiness that only lasts as long as things are going the way we want them to go. You see, joy is a deeper, more long-lasting type of satisfaction than just being happy. When we recognize that everything we have is a gift from God, we can have a true sense of contentment that doesn't change regardless of our circumstances. Choosing humility and joy even can help us grow closer to the people around us instead of selfishly pushing them away like pride does. A truly humble and joyful person is willing to step out of the spotlight and wholeheartedly celebrate the gifts, achievements, and qualities of others. That kind of thing is really difficult to do when we're only concerned with celebrating ourselves. When we humbly pursue this kind of joy, it opens our eyes to be able to see and to celebrate what God is doing in the lives of others and in our lives. When we encounter someone else's success or see them achieve something that we had hoped for ourselves, approaching it with joy instead of pride allows us to actually be happy for them instead of secretly being jealous. Right, chances are good that everyone will struggle with pride at some point in their life. Not going to lie. Everyone will struggle with this at one point in their life. It's just one of those struggles that we all have to pay attention to as human beings. But what can we do to guard ourselves against allowing pride to control our lives? Here is a few steps that I think would be beneficial, but I warn you, they're not easy. The first is this. Number one, do a pride check. One way to push against the inevitable slide into prideful thinking is to regularly check in with yourself and spend some time honestly reflecting on how much of a presence pride has in your life. I want you to listen to this list of pride check questions to ask yourself. Do I always become jealous or critical of others who succeed? Do I always have to win? Am I argumentative and often think my way is the right way, the only way, or the best way? Do I have a pattern of lying or bending the truth? Do I have a hard time of admitting when I'm wrong? Do I become defensive when I'm criticized or corrected? Do I frequently interrupt others when they are speaking? Do I speak critically of others, or am I quick to point out their faults? Do I have a hard time being told what to do? Do I find it hard to admit when I need help? Do I complain often? These are some hard-hitting questions, especially if you are willing to be honest with yourself and answer them truthfully. But that's not easy to do. So here are a few tips and tricks if you're going to commit to do this week. But when you go through this list, remember this. First, it's not about keeping score, okay? It's not about keeping score. This isn't a BuzzFeed quiz that'll tell you which kind of Disney princess you are, right? You can't say, well, I only answered yes to 5 of these questions, so I think I'm good. The goal of asking yourself these questions is simply to get you thinking about your own thoughts, your words, and your actions that might be evidence that you have some work to do to reduce the presence of pride in your life. But it's not about keeping score. Second, this is about you, not about anyone else. Okay? If I'm being completely honest, my default way to answer these types of questions is, do I always have to win? No, but I think I know who does. When we use questions like this to compare ourselves to others, it usually results in us not actually taking an honest look at our own pride. So again, it's not about keeping score. It's about you, not anyone else. And third, don't beat yourself up over it, okay? Like I said earlier, these types of questions can be brutal if you are honest. But the goal isn't to make you feel ashamed or guilty. We all have selfish tendencies, so it's not like anyone is going to be able to answer no to every one of these questions. So instead of beating yourself up over a few yes answers, just think of it as a way for you to know which areas of your life that you need to be extra alert as you try to reduce the role of pride in your life. So again, spend some time honestly this week processing through these questions. If you want to take it a step further, ask someone who loves you and knows you well, someone that you trust, who has your best interest in mind, to talk to them, to talk through with them these questions and help you see the blind spots of pride in your life. But fair warning, this is not a fun process. This is brutally honest. Only do this if you are willing to set aside your defensiveness and actually listen to what the other person is going to share. The next thing that we can do is number 2, celebrate someone else's success. One of the best ways to recognize pride in your life is when it's difficult for you to celebrate when others are successful. Pride can make you envious or jealous of their success, and it can make you think that I should have had that opportunity or I could have done it better if I had had the chance. One of the best ways to fight against this tendency is to regularly celebrate others, not just internally in your own heart and mind, but to actually go to someone else and celebrate with them. This week, I want to challenge you to find a person to celebrate. It could be a friend, a sibling, a teacher, a parent, a teammate, or literally anyone else in your life. Look for a way that you can make them feel special for something that they did. Cheer them on. Congratulate them. Find a way to show them that you are proud of them. There are so many ways to do this. Send them a text. Get them a gift. Make them a sign. Rent a plane with a banner out back. Throw them a parade. The possibilities are endless. When you intentionally shine the spotlight on someone else, you will be demonstrating God's love and sharing your joy with them. Imagine what it will be like when someone else experiences joy because of the way you celebrated them. Imagine what it would be like if someone did this for you. And one more thing before we go, and we'll be done. Number 3 is thank God for something new each day. One of the best ways to beat pride and to fight pride is to be grateful. When you make a habit out of expressing gratitude for what you have been given, you will find that there's just less room for pride in your life. So, take a few minutes each day, in the morning before school, or at lunch, on your phone's notes app, or in a journal before you go to bed. Write down something new that you are grateful for. And then at the end of the week, look back and notice how focusing on gratitude can shift the spotlight away from yourself and toward the incredible things that God has given you and the great things that He has done in your life.